So we are going to start without further ado and work on this roundtable on the Arab city of the future. I am very happy to be moderating this roundtable on the Arab city, and I'm very happy that this topic of the city was picked as one of the six main topics of the forum on the renewal of the Arab world. Because cities are the melting pot for the other five topics of this forum: culture, entrepreneurship, energy, of course, education, and of course, the empowerment of women. That is the first reason. Secondly, it is because the urbanization of the Arab world is happens very fast and takes on different shapes. It is something that is not specific to the Arab world. We see this all over the world today. Global population is growing very rapidly, and within this population, urban population is growing also very quickly in the same proportions. So with these two phenomena, we have a very speedy growth in urban population. It's more or less organized and successful. So it's always interesting to take time to assess the situation with the experts who are with us today to try and understand how this increase in urban population, this in-depth urbanization happens in Arab cities and how the city is going to evolve. If we look at the Arab world today, we have a very diverse landscape. There are vertical cities emerging from the desert in the Gulf countries with a very quick growth of concrete forests, big attractiveness, both for business and tourism. We also have cities that seem to be sprawling, taking more and more space, and being created through the aggregation of people coming from the countryside. These cities are probably less designed than the vertical ones, and they are facing very difficult challenges, which is to offer quality conditions and services to these populations coming to the city and changing their way of life. So how can we make these cities attractive? And then third type of city or urban area, the Medina, traditional city centers, historical centers, which are traditional centers of Arab cities and who are looking to find their place in this new urban landscape. Can they adapt? Can they change in order to remain the center of urban life? Can they do it? How can they do it? We'll be able to talk about this because we have experts of cities today. So we have the pleasure of having six participants. Right now, we only have 5, but I know that number 6 will join us soon. And they will help us approach this subject from different standpoints. I'm going to introduce them. They are sitting down in the order they will be speaking. So you have a general view of how we will talk about this subject. We'll first talk about these vertical cities on the Gulf with His Excellency Marwan Jassim Al-Sarkal, who will tell us about Sharjah, his own experience. We are dealing with specialists, on-the-ground experts who have practical cases to present us. Then I will hand over to Camille Bonenfant, who works with the CEO of the RAGP, and she is replacing him and also has a lot of experience. and will be telling us about one of these difficult issues in these sprawled out areas, which is transportation, common transportation, in order to avoid asphyxiation in these cities. Then we'll move over to the Medina, the beautiful Medina of Tunis, with Zubair Mouli, who is now working for the Association de Sauvegarde de la Médina de Tunis, and I am sure that Salma Samar Demouji will be very interested in this presentation, and she will tell us about this traditional architecture and of the possibility of using this traditional architecture in the cities of the future. The one you don't know, you don't see yet, is Mr. Philippe de Fontaine-Vive from the European Bank of Investment, who is going to tell us that whatever the solution, you can try to find funding, because of course there's a cost to developing these cities. And we'll finish with Karl Charot, who is an architect but also a blogger at Karl Marx, and he will try to step back and use his experience and his humor and good understanding of all these topics can make an overview of what has been said, and we'll then be able to debate. So this is a subject we want to talk about, and right now I am going to give the floor to His Excellency, who is the CEO of Sharjah Investment, Investment Development Authority, Shuruk, and who's been able to transform the city of Sharjah and to promote tourism in his city. And the question we'd like to ask him is how he sees the future of these cities, and should they be hybrid spaces, especially in these cities of the Gulf, with this combination of commerce and entertainment.
Thank you. So I will have my speech in English, if you don't mind. Good afternoon, all. It is with great pleasure that we talked here and tell you more about the city of Sharjah. Just before talking about how hybrid the city is and what makes it a special city, I'll give you a couple of information about Sharjah as an emirate, and then I will dig into telling you what makes it a special city and how did the government created one of the hybrid cities of the region. Sharjah as a city, Sharjah is one of the 7 emirates that makes the United Arab Emirates. That was the 3rd largest emirate. It is known as the industrial hub of the United Arab Emirates. It's the educational hub, so the highest number of universities actually are in Sharjah. It is it is highly populated. Almost 1 million people actually live in the emirate of Sharjah. And I'm talking back, it goes back to history to the 1560s. So that was actually the first maps that actually mentioned Sharjah was in the 1500. However, Sharjah have decided to be part of the United Arab Emirates in the 1971 in December. And in that stage, Sharjah is known that it doesn't have any oil reserves. So the part of being part of the United Arab Emirates makes it a very important role to be united in a bigger country. So His Highness, and as you might know about the United Arab Emirates, we have a federal law that the whole government of the United Arab Emirates is under one president. However, every emirate, like Sharjah or Dubai or Abu Dhabi, have their own federal laws, and so they have their own budgets. So the Sharjah Emirate is one of the emirates that actually sits on 2 oceans. It sits on the Indian Ocean, which is close to Oman, and sits also on the Arabian Gulf as a geographically. So it's located into 2 different waterfronts. What is so diverse about Sharjah that we have mountains, we have sand dunes, and a cosmopolitan city. However, Sharjah is very unique that it has many cities around the whole emirate of Sharjah. The whole objective was, from the government of Sharjah, how to create a balance between economic, between history, between traditions, and between being a modern city. Sharjah has actually been selected by UNESCO as the cultural capital in 1998. And how it happened to be that it had focused a lot on education, it had focused a lot on creating destination for visitors that actually live in Sharjah. So we have more than 16 museums that are currently in Sharjah. However, as I said, it has many different cities within Sharjah. The government created a connectivity between all of the cities, between Sharjah city, and in the central region we have Al Daid city and Mleha, and in the Indian Ocean we have Khorfakan, Kalba, and Diba. So the main objective was how can we build on the history of the region, how can we build on the geographically connecting those, and how can we build on a nation that is well educated. In 1950, we had one school in Sharjah. In 2014, we have more than 50,000 students studying in the Sharjah universities, which means that there is a dramatic shift about how did the government focus on education. How important was education to develop a nation? The other important thing is how can we create a connectivity towards creating an identity with our Arabic values, Islamic values, and make sure that we become a modern city. How can we become a place where people would actually come and live and stay there and not just work in it? So if you talk about Sharjah today, talking about 1 million people living in Sharjah, only 12% are Emiratis. The rest are non-Emiratis. However, everybody live peacefully in a way that you are not selected to stay in one area. So when it comes to a design point of view, you will not find a cluster where Indians would live. You wouldn't find a cluster where Emiratis would live. You wouldn't find. We created a unique city that everybody lives all around the city. We don't have a business hub. All of the businesses are basically are actually designed in a way that to minimize movement around the major city. However, Shuruq is the entity that I actually represent. We're an entity that promotes investments, attracting investments to the Emirate Sharjah, however also developing projects. We managed within our first project to focus on history. So we are reviving the historical area in Sharjah under the name of the Heart of Sharjah, which is actually a location that sits in the old city of Sharjah, where we actually revive this whole historical part. It's the Heart of Sharjah. It is currently in the tentative listing of the UNESCO, where we're reviving the past of that part of the world. Once the oil was discovered in the Emirates in the 1960s and primarily in Abu Dhabi, the wealth have changed and everybody tried to develop buildings. Everybody tried to come up with something that is totally different. In Sharjah, we try to protect the history of that nation. We believe that this is going to create a different message to our future generation. However, we also created different developments in every area in Sharjah. So we had a focus on human development in a huge way. We have more than 7 organizations that are developing human skills within the Sharjah. So what is important? We try to create pockets of entertainment. So people would actually have entertainment areas next to them. They would have a business hub next to them. They would have an educational hub next to them. They would have a housing allocated all around their region. So what's also important for us, we try to focus on culture, on tourism, on green tourism, to make sure that every city is unique by itself. So, for example, if we talk about a city like Kalba, which is one of the cities that Sharjah has, which sits in the Indian Ocean, we focus there on green tourism. We focus on ecotourism. We're talking about the landscape that is there, whether the type of animals that are living there, as the gazelles, for example, or the turtles, or the kingfisher bird, that actually is unique for that destination. On another area, which is Mleha, for example, that sits in the central region of Sharjah, we focus there on archaeology. So archaeology is the main point, where we have archaeology goes 6,000 years BC, which if you try to make a unique differentiation between every city, and they all support the main emirate, then you're creating a destination that everybody would love to visit. So it's tourism, it's economic impact, it's social impact, and it's environmental impact. Strategically, we're trying to be also as modern as possible, but without removing the values of our traditions. We need to make sure that whoever visits Sharjah knows that he is visiting an Arabian city. He knows from the architecture. So you'll find most of the buildings in the Emirate of Sharjah are designed in a very sensitive way. So you'll find the architecture, rich architecture, and at the same time the landscaping plays a major role in it. So the number of projects that we are developing is more than 56 projects as a development entity in Sharjah. But we try to make sure that we provide jobs for the people that are living in the Emirates rather than people that are from Sharjah but living in the United Arab Emirates. It's very important that we 7 Emirates work together and supporting each other. One of the questions that I've received within this panel was, is it sustainable? Is it something that we can really be sustainable? And I think that the most sustainable thing that you would find is creating a hybrid city. The issue was in the beginning of the oil revolution is that cities were designed by people that were having industrial zone by itself, having residential zone by itself, having commercial zone by itself, which creates problem while commuting to them. So it creates traffic, it creates issues with social environment. So the way is, how can you create a balance? If you go back without using the cars, people would design cities in a different way. So the key master of actually creating a city that is very, very important is how can you create less commuting between where you stay, where you work, and try to create a way that everybody lives in harmony in one area. And that's what we try to do in the United Arab Emirates, from an architectural way, from a master planning point of view, and even from an environment point of view. So that's, in a nutshell, what my own theory is about. How can you design a city that you'd want people to feeling safe in it, feeling that they don't have to commute or waste time in traffic for 2 hours or 3 hours, and at the same time feel that they live in a city that they always want to be having their kids raised in that city. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Vous avez réussi certainement au moins une chose, c'est
Thank you very much. At least you succeeded in making us want to visit Sharjah. I am very interested in seeing how you managed this chemistry between modernity and tradition and culture. And I thank you for ending your presentation on this issue of traffic. And I'm now going to hand the floor to Camille Bonenfant from the RATP, and the idea was to see with her how we can manage to improve the problems faced in a number of cities, not only Arab cities, but it is true that it's really a striking problem in a lot of Arab cities today, cities that sprawl and in which populations are far from their place of work or the places for entertainment. So I guess you're going to suggest your own system, and I guess that you have experience in these different cities and different situations. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would first like to apologize on behalf of Pierre Mongin, who is the CEO of RATP group, but who was convened by the Minister of the Interior and the Minister of Defense following the terrorist attacks of last week to look at the implementation of the Vigipirate plan in Paris. I'm going to talk with you about the mobility issues. RATP is the 5th transportation operator in the world, and it has been developing its know-how in Paris and the Paris area, but few people know that our group has more than 20% of its revenues outside of the Paris area, and the goal is to have less than a third, around a third of it by 2020. Outside of Paris. We are now in 14 different countries, and we have a common subsidiary with the SNCF, Citra, which is in 50 different countries in the world and has been in North Africa and the Gulf countries for many years. It's been in Egypt for more than 40 years and had started working on the initial plans for the Cairo metro. The idea is to use the know-how we have from Paris to apply it to other sprawling cities. And we want to share this with other cities which have different histories and cultures. When we want to develop urban transportation networks, we have 3 goals. First of all, facilitate daily life. Don't want daily commute to be unbearable. So making daily life easier is our first goal. Secondly, we want to reduce traffic, but also the ensuing pollution. This is even more true in France this year. We're going to have the COP21 in France this year. So the share of transportation, which represents 25% of emissions, is very significant. And the third objective is to provide social inclusion through transportation networks. The recent events in France have shown that the lack of mobility created extra tensions. It is true here and it is true elsewhere. We have a few examples that show that even though there's not a single model for a city, there are know-hows that can be implemented in different types of cities. And it's interesting to see how cities adapt really well to transportation network. Let me give you the example of the Constantine tram cars. We wondered if the tram could really find its place in the city, show that it worked really well, and inhabitants got used to it much more quickly than we expected. Another example of making daily life easier, let's talk about Casablanca, where we also have tram cars. And as early as the first year, 22 million people used it, and the following year, it was 30 million users that they had. So it's really close to the figures that we have in areas where they've had the tram cars a lot more. Now, another example is the G line of the metro with the 10 different metro stations in Algiers, and it totally changes the city. When you talk about the Gulf cities, the situation is slightly different in terms of transportation. The difference is that in North African cities, there's an inclusion issue. There are a lot of constraints in terms of space, whereas in the Gulf cities, there is more space because things are designed from the start. So networks are being built taking into account from the start of multimodal transport. We we design together bus, metro, and tram cars. And from the start, we think about interconnection between these transportation modes. We think about the ticketing system with the same tickets for the bus and the metro. We think about real-time information for users as well. And these are things we've learned over time, and we now have the necessary know-how, and we can put it at your disposal. And because networks are created from scratch, it's easier to design them, including all important elements. What is striking in Gulf cities is the speed with which these networks are being built. To give you some elements of comparison, I worked on the topic of the Great Paris. It's the future of transportation in the Paris area. In Doha, today, there are 22 tunnel machines that are working simultaneously in Paris, and we're very proud of our project. We are only going to have 7 of these tunnel machines at the same time. So we have completely different schedules. For the Great Paris, we'll open the first line in 2020. And the Doha metro is going to be working in 4 or 5 years. For us at our RATP, with our partnership in Saudi Arabia, we signed an agreement for a bus network in Riyadh. In 2 years' time, we are going to have a network with 1,000 buses. 1,000 buses is a quarter of the RATP buses in the Paris area. So the deadlines are completely different. And of course, that's really a dream come true for RATP engineers. They love that kind of playground that they can use to grow their own know-how. What is at stake is also realizing how these Gulf cities learn and acquire the know-how as organizing authorities and planning authorities. What is a challenge is to know what inhabitants will be doing. These challenges of using the different modes of transportation is an issue. Will people in these cities let go on their cars to use public transportation? We're going to try to make them comfortable, air-conditioned, and pleasant to be in. But this is still a challenge for the future. And this challenge is showing people that public transportation is not for poor people. It is for everyone. It is for people who want to go for entertainment, who want to go to work, and for tourists. And it can welcome everyone at the same time. So that's one of the main challenges we have to tackle with. We have proof that this can work. We've done this in North African cities. Now, to conclude, I would like to say that RATP, which is a public, state-owned company, and it has a role that goes a lot further than just building a metro network and operating it. Pierre Montjoie, our chairman, always says that RATP is building a city by building public transportation. It's true that the Middle Eastern cities is giving us an incredible example. We have a city that is building its tramcar network before building the city itself. For a company such as ours, it's really remarkable. So I wanted to thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this presentation. Thank you. Thank you for this very enthusiastic presentation.
Now we will be able to ask one of many questions, namely, how do we get around in a Medina? And Mr. Zubair Mouli will be talking about that. You were born in the Medina of Tunis, and you are now the General Director of the Safeguarding Association of the Medina of Tunis. You are also, as I said, the Director of Arabic Heritage. So our question is as follows. How has this Medina changed? How were we able to renovate it? All the while preserving its original qualities. And what are the effects of this transformation on the city, on its inhabitants, on the use of the Medina? And how can we and how should we design the Medinas of the cities of tomorrow? Well, thank you very much. I hope that you will see the pictures on the screen behind me. Now, it is true that the Medina of Tunis is on the World Heritage Site, and it was actually in the 9th century. Today, it is seen as one of the best preserved Medinas in the Maghreb region. In 1960, the Medina was seen as a Medina that was going to go on declining and disappearing. At the time, a lot of of the Medinas were seen as something that pertained to the old world. Thanks to the Association of the Safeguarding of the Medina of Tunis and with the municipality of Tunis these 40 past years, we were able to renovate it. It is a real important fight for the right of all to have access to high-quality urban areas. We really want to gain ownership of our heritage, be it be urban or architectural. We see it as true urban architecture and a citizen architecture. It is not a process, or rather it is a process in which we want the inhabitants of Tunis to take part in. There are a lot of fights that had begun before the creation of the association, which was to really avoid any destruction of the Medina. So, what could the renovation of the Medina of Tunis bring to the future generations, or how is it a model to follow? Well, I think that it is the approach that we adopted that is very important in order to give it a new value. We have actions that were taken. This approach is also in a framework of sustainable development, and I will try to explain to you why. We must also underline that in the Arab region, the Tunis Medina was the first one that took into account a more holistic approach in terms of preservation. Now, we are basing ourselves on 6 elements, 6 factors. First of all, we wanted to build a real know-how. So, we want to update this know-how because the Medinas just keep changing. There is a real knowledge of the historic cities, and this is indispensable if we want to preserve it. Secondly, we do not want to wait for the perfect legislation in order to act. And as a matter of fact, it is not legislation that preserves heritage. No, it is rather the citizens that save heritage. Thirdly, we wanted to conserve and preserve not only the buildings, but also the inhabitants. We wanted to, of course, save the social fabric that was in the Medina. I would just like to give you an example of that. Do you see the images on the screen? Yes? Okay. But they're a bit quick. So, just the example I'd like to give is the project of restructuring in the Al-Hafsia neighborhood and the sanitation projects in certain buildings. Now, in the first project, we were able to reverse the trend of deterioration that had been happening since the beginning of the 20th century, and we were able to improve the infrastructure of the neighborhood and preserve the social fabric of the Medina. We were able to also enhance all of the activities and business activities in the Medina and to enhance the interactions between the different social classes in the Medina. The second project went from 1990 to 2011. It was a habitat project and a sanitation project for overdense buildings. So here again, there was a real social approach in order to reduce the ill housing in the old neighborhoods and to improve the quality of life of the disadvantaged inhabitants. We really wanted the inhabitants that were living in those buildings, in the historic centers, to save and to protect their buildings. We were able to also launch rehabilitation of housing in the Medina by looking at the right measures. Fourthly, we wanted to give more value to the heritage as a living heritage, not as a sort of museum heritage. We wanted all of this to be part of the social, cultural, and economic life. This would enable us to make sure that the inhabitants had a better interest in the value of their heritage. In order to really preserve the buildings, we had to make sure that the inhabitants would help us to do so. Our associations tries to do that, and it also acts as a sort of land planning association. These buildings are really part and parcel of our approach. This is a best way to fight against the homogenization of the urban area. 5, we wanted to make sure that the inhabitants take a part in giving value back to the Medina. It was seen as an intermediary action and to make sure that they would understand the urban value of where they live. And here you can see a sort of circuit that we developed with my association, with government funds and funds from the Ministry of Tourism. This happened from 2008 and 2010 in the center of the Medina, the restoration project and evaluation project. And here you have 10 souks around the Grand Mosque. And so here we really wanted to raise awareness amongst the local population. We also wanted to offer an alternative to mass tourism and to start a project that was good for the local population. Here again, we wanted to act upon the old buildings and all the while ask the inhabitants what they thought we had to do. And just one anecdote on this project. When we went along with it, we worked with the municipality of Tunis. We decided to reorganize traffic. So we didn't want any cars in the Medina, and we wanted to regulate the traffic and the entrance of cars. All of the inhabitants were against that, so we needed a lot of time to convince them. And then after a year and a half of no cars going, passing in front of their house, and after the revolution, when cars were once again allowed, the first ones to complain were the inhabitants who didn't want that in the first place. Now, sixth approach, we wanted to integrate the recent heritage that was next to the Medina to the safeguarding process. We wanted to really create a sort of transition between the two historic hearts of the city. The city that was created in the 19th and 20th century, which is a plurifunctional and very dense city, which has nothing to do with the city of the 21st century, where you have very highly specialized pockets, energy waste, and a tendency to socioeconomic segregation. I'm not trying to idealize what we've been doing in Tunisia since the 19th century, but the historic centers, the dense historic centers are going to see the first eco-neighborhoods in Tunis. So now, what about the changes? What are the effects of this transformation on the inhabitants? It used to be just a former capital city where there was a loss of social content. But if you look at the Medina today, it has now a new value because it has been de-densified. There's a real regeneration of its built heritage, and there is a multiplicity of its functions. This is due to will, to evolution, and this Medina is going to become a vector of cultural rebirth. The restoration projects that have been going on these past 30 years have triggered a real rehabilitation of the old buildings. You have now inhabitants that really want to actually live in the Medina, even though they didn't used to before. They want to live in the Medina because of its history, because of its character. You also have investors, 90% of local investors that are now looking to setting up projects in the Medina. So thanks to all of this, the Medina is not a museum, and I think that our strategy never looked for the Medina to become a museum. It is a real lively center, a center of life. Of course, it is a cultural center, but it is not a cultural ghetto, which is what happened in certain countries, certain cities rather, that have been gentrified because of all the artistic activities going on, or the fact that life is expensive in those city centers. So the Medina really avoided this trap of being just closed up on itself. On the contrary, it is much more open to all of the inhabitants. I'm not saying that everything is perfect. No, there are problems, of course. But I would just like to conclude by saying that a few words about, what about the city city of tomorrow. Cities are the witness of what happens over history, and we see that tomorrow's cities will be nothing like today's cities. Now, the city, or rather in these new cities, the city is designed as with standardized models, whereas tomorrow's cities, just like the Medina, will be a city that could be characterized by a lot of different social classes, where you have different inhabitants from different classes, where you have all of the different functions that are close by, so you don't need your car, a city where you have a real synergy between what you need in the urban zone, where you need the rural zones, using energy in a sustainable way, but also using groundwater, and also making sure that you have a typology of housing that is good for family life. We do not want a standardization of architectural designs. We want a city that enables mobility and manage mobilities, and that is what we are looking for. Thank you very much. It's very interesting to listen to you talk about, the Medina, and now we're going to listen to Sharjah, who's going to talk about, this, or rather Sharjah. We heard about Sharjah, who talked about, this traditional versus new city, and so we see that in the Medina, you really tried to mix both, and I would like to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Fauviv. But now we will give the floor to Ms. Salma Samar Damlouji, who is an architect, a professor in architecture, and a real specialist in all of these issues, and namely of the traditional architecture, vernacular architecture. And so I would like to know how, beyond Tunis and beyond its Medina, how do you see the vernacular architecture, and how can this architecture be part and parcel of the future of Arab cities? I would also like to know how we can safeguard this heritage and the know-how that use local materials and use local resources to create architectural forms that give way to energy-efficient cities and beautiful cities at that also. So I believe that you are going to be, so Ms. Damlouji, you're going to speak, and Mr. Mouli will hold the mic, if I understand correctly.
It's very kind of him. We have kind men in our party. The proposed forum premise, being vernacular as a practical source of inspiration, withstanding economic challenges, as the Medina hypothesis becomes the most attractive reference, a focal point in the dialogue. Okay, I'll hold it in that case, unfortunately. Very well. Okay, so a focal point in the dialogue of the future of Arab cities that we have today.
Vraiment très proche.
Future of Arab cities. What else? No, that's okay. All right. Goethe wrote, "Something is missing," and Ernst Bloch quotes this sentence in his response to Adorno on Utopia, in a debate in 1964 with due acknowledgement to Hans Ulrich Obrist, asking, and what is this something? Short of Utopia in discussing or rethinking the future, what qualifies the discussion, what qualifies our discussion of the future? More importantly, in thinking the future, we should in turn ask, what is missing? We, architects who are in touch, who are in touch with and living in Arab cities along remnant pockets of Medinas, are aware that both the dialogue and negotiating ground is this something that is missing. Arab cities, ? Or Arab cities, dying cities, forgotten cities, neglected cities, dislocated and destroyed cities, is the composition of prominent historic Arab cities located in Libya, Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. The state of the urban infrastructure and institutions is pitiful, North African cities have had a much better fate and present in retaining the city narrative, as we just heard, with relative, secure, stable phenomenon, and continue to work on the future, since they are able to engage in the present and past reference, of course. Tunis, Morocco, and to a large extent, Algeria subscribe to this. However, when the present of cities or the survival of the cities present is threatened, and the structure of the past is broken down, obliterated, and at best fragmented, the future becomes complex and vague to contemplate, let alone negotiate. There is no escape the inherent dark condition masking over the secular present of those Arab cities we inhabit. While the geopolitics of a region is marred by disintegration and inaccountability, more depressing in parallel is the invention of brand new cities in a gulf, Dubai, Doha, that has benefited from the attrition and loss of original ancient and modern cities. Those of the Nile, the Mediterranean, the Euphrates, and Tigris, Cairo, Alexandria, Aleppo, Damascus, Mosul, Basra, and Baghdad, constructing sky towers of glass, concrete, and steel, safe deposit boxes maybe, and reclaiming the Eurocentric title of the Middle East. Why? A depressing dichotomy, despairing dichotomy, and shift in narrative is here at play. Is it unnoticed, though? In this light, resuscitating cities and rebuilding is the best future we can reassert or propose, since the present cities built in the past few decades are horrific, inhumane, and unsustainable, irrespective of questionable LEED certification, this is the LEED, and the high allocated budgets to advertise the contrary, particularly in creating utopian desert cities, such as those as Masdar on the fringe of nowhere. The destruction of genuine and valuable cultural architectural landscape, which identified Arab cities, whether ancient architecture, ecological environments, or the contemporary urban fabric and resource, is immense and should not be left unnoticed or undiscussed. Precipitated through civil wars, silent drones, and occupation, the process is prolonged, consolidated by the direct inheritors, the benefactors, or developers, thriving on immediate consequences over wastelands of civil unrest, the contractors, private and individual land and property speculators, corporates and dealers, move in to support government apparatuses, operating in measures of dire security and instability, creating chaotic cities with broken down infrastructure, sewage, electricity and water, roads and pavements, or cities of despair. Beirut security measures, for example, where I'm living at the moment, become elitist and localized. Embassies and politicians are at liberty to protect themselves only, constructing fortified contraptions, annexing pavements and streets, transgressing public space within the city quarters, building freestanding concrete wall panel segments fashioned after the Israeli West Bank wall, blocking passage and safety, diverting roads, and endangering pedestrians. Whose cities are these? Are they still Arab? Can we still discuss a future? Finally, and most importantly, are the unfinished projects or the emerging patterns. Hassan Fathi, the Egyptian architect, was accused in the 1970s of being nostalgic and seeking to reinvent the past, a bourgeois with the luxury of designing for the poor, palaces for the rich. However, decades later, his work has become more pressing to consider amidst the resultant chaos he foresaw and suffered from fighting in isolation. His unfinished and unrealized projects and oeuvre is the material we need to contemplate and get our students and architects to understand. To be able to assess the same matrix in dialogue, he tirelessly endeavored to propose a dialogue between the center and periphery, the urban and rural, between the modern and contemporary, to negotiate the divide between the past Arab Islamic Medina quarters and the future city. This requires instilling culture with a capital C back to design, architecture, education, Arab studies, and city making. In the same way has been the daunting task of facing and negotiating the spaces within neglected and forgotten cities. This latter has been an occupation I invested in and what came to define the relevance and future of my work. Here, unfinished or unrealized projects matter. A fulfilling landscape against a temporal condition, a prospect that is not hindered by or subject to ostensible success or failure. Operating at the margin means engaging with communities and builders, walls of earth, materials, and crafts of ingenious construction systems. Negotiating the present means altering the course, the modi operandi, the method and thinking with action. The act of realizing such projects, irrespective of how small, lies in resuscitating cities. The revival, through reworking and transferring complex forms, connections, patterns, and trends that make the Medina, is undeniably irresistible and compelling an act I have invested in sustaining an emerging pattern to consolidate and inspire a contemporary language. A language that is attractive and desirable for the future. I also hope that that language will be Arab, because as my good friend reminded me the other day, it was Barbara Guest, the American poet, and I asked whether I could quote her, said, "When language goes, everything goes." So, a contemporary language that is attractive and desirable for the future. This establishes the paradigm that will enable us to bridge and reach over a prevalent, dark, urban, and political present towards the future of Arab cities. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Cet exposé et les très belles photos que vous avez
for the
passées
beautiful
derrière
pictures that
On
you
pourra parler bien sûr
showed
de
us
tout ça
as
après
well.
nos
We can
différentes
talk about this
interventions.
after
Alors donc
the end
maintenant
of the
nous allons passer
presentations. We are
quelque
now
chose
going
peut-être d'un petit peu moins
to
lyrique
move on to
avec
something
Philippe
maybe
de Fontaine-Vive qui va nous
lyrical with
parler
Philippe de Fontaine-Vive, who
d'investissement.
is going
Il
to
est
tell us
premier
about
vice-président de la Banque européenne d'investissement
of the
et il est
European
aussi, si je ne me
Investment
trompe,
Bank, and I believe
chargé de la
he
partie
is also,
méditerranéenne,
in charge
donc
of
il
the,
connaît forcément très bien tous ces sujets. Donc comment la BEI intervient-elle finalement dans le financement des projets de rénovation de villes ou de création de villes? On a vu qu'il y avait des différentes phases possibles, différentes formes possibles de création ou de rénovation. Comment la BEI contribue-t-elle finalement à cette évolution, à cette transition voulue en tout cas par les uns et par les autres vers la ville durable à partir de situations très différentes et comment répondre aux grands besoins de financement qui se trouvent derrière, de toute façon, ce développement de la population urbaine et de l'urbanisation en général.
Merci de cette introduction et avant d'être technique et de répondre à toute question financière européenne ou méditerranéenne que vous pourriez me poser, vous me permettrez simplement de profiter du fait de vous rejoindre seulement maintenant pour, à travers vous, remercier l'IMA et les organisateurs de cette conférence d'ainsi à marquer avec ces 2 jours l'anniversaire des événements
for marking the anniversary at the Tunisian events. I was in the south of Tunisia in January of 2011, and for me, this is when Arab renewal started. And I'm very happy to be in Paris in January 2015, where democratic renewal is also taking shape. And I feel that in the two events, there's the same answer with national unity. I remember that since January 2011, some of us have followed the development of Tunisia and with remarkable results, with a president of the Republic who has been elected with no possible contestation. We have a newly elected government. The outgoing government is also remarkable, approved by all. What just happened in France with the national solidarity, I hope will turn into the same type of democratic national unity with a constructive approach. And because he asked me to talk about the city today and not the nation, I'm going to limit myself to the city. And I would like to thank you for inviting a banker to talk about these issues. And I would like to give you 3 reasons for having me in this panel session. First of all, the skills of the European Investment Bank on the city. And I'm not going to start talking about financing. I'm going to talk about space, I'm going to talk about jobs, about social mix, and about the environment. We first have to talk about these issues in order to talk properly about the city. And this is part of our scope at the AIB. In space management, it is really essential to start by thinking out the city. In its existing space, how can we give it back the soul that it may have lost? We listened to the executive director of the Heritage Society of the old city of Tunis, and he explained that he's trying to restore the soul of this city with other colleagues. And to stay on this topic of Tunis, when we helped Tunis work on this lake in the south of Tunis, it was done with European engineers, and we've been doing this for many years. Another example, because we don't want to have just a Tunis example, or no, Tunisian example, we are currently financing the tram between Rabat and Salé. It means that we are building a metropolis of the future. But we are using different words when we are talking among Europeans, and when we talk about extra-European countries. Are they necessarily extra-European? I'm not sure, but because we're so close. So first of all, the management of the space, which is absolutely necessary to think the city in the current development, current state of the art. Second skill we have is employment. A well-thought-out city, very beautiful. If there are no jobs left, it's not working. We are not getting to the ghost city example of the United States, but let's go back to Tunis. In the Medina loses all value-creating jobs. All plans just disappear. So it's important for us to have job creation, value creation, economic areas, innovation areas from the start, before talking about money. And I'm going to give you another example. I think the good example is the new city of Zenata, which was designed by the King of Morocco, and it's going to be an exemplary city, a city of the future.
que ce soit du côté de Masdar dans le Golfe
is
ou
the
du
bet,
côté de
whether
Zenata
in the
au
Gulf
Maroc,
with
que ce
Masdam
soit
or
dans le
in
Mashrek ou dans le
Zenata in
Maghreb,
the Gulf,
c'est très important
it
de
is
donner en image,
important
représentation médiatique mondiale, une image
to
de
show
ville
the world
moderne, écologique, où les gens travaillent, où les gens sont heureux et où on a accès
a
aux nouvelles
modern
technologies.
city
Troisième
where
compétence
people
qui
are
me semble
working
absolument
and
essentielle également
living,
et qui est très européenne,
and that
c'est la
has a
mixité
lot of
sociale.
technology.
Il faut refuser
Another
absolument
aspect,
tous
a
les
very
modèles
European
de
one, is social
boboisation
diversity.
qui peuvent exister ou de ghettoisation
We have
qui
to avoid
existent dans
the
d'autres conceptions
yuppie
du développement économique. Et c'est pour ça que j'ai inventé le
that we
programme
see in
Medina
a lot
2030
of
avec quelques ingénieurs de la BUI pour remettre
places.
de l'emploi,
This
de
is
la
why
vie,
we've been
de la
working on
mixité
this
au
with
cœur des villes
the
arabes. Et là
European
encore, pour
Investment
donner
Bank
un
to put
exemple
back
concret,
social diversity
nous
in
avons conclu un partenariat
Arab cities.
sur le
To give
logement
you
social
concrete
en Tunisie.
examples,
Monsieur le directeur général s'en souvient lorsque nous étions
made
en
an
décembre
agreement on
dernier
social
en
housing.
Tunisie.
We were in
Il
Tunisia
faut
last December.
donner de l'eau courante, de
You have
l'électricité,
to bring
de
running
l'informatique à
water,
cet habitat
electricity,
qui s'est fait de façon, disons les
IT
choses
networks
gentiment,
to
spontanée, pas toujours légale,
this
mais ils ont droit
spontaneous
à des conditions de
housing
vie décentes.
that
Et si on
happened.
veut éviter
They have
la
a right
dégradation que nous
to
connaissons ici
proper living
en Europe
conditions.
également,
And if we
il vaut
want
mieux
to avoid
planifier,
the situation
concevoir dès l'origine
we now
des plans
have
de développement
in Europe,
urbain
have to
intelligent.
design from
Donc la
the
troisième
start
compétence d'assurer la mixité
intelligent
sociale me paraît
development
absolument
plans.
essentielle.
So
La
guaranteeing
quatrième
social
dimension
diversity
qui me paraît
is
très
essential
importante,
in
c'est
my eyes.
l'énergie. Nous sommes à Paris, nous sommes l'année du
The
sommet sur le
fourth
climat.
element
Le
is
monde arabe
energy.
participe pleinement de
The
cette
Arab
évolution.
world
Il
is
doit être
involved
aussi
in this
exemplaire
evolution.
à tous égards.
It
Le
has to be
soleil
exemplary as
doit
well.
être utilisé pour
Solar
développer l'énergie solaire.
energy
Le vent
has to be
doit
used.
être utilisé.
Wind
Nous
energy
sommes la
has to
banque
be
qui a
used.
développé
We
l'expertise
are the
du
bank
financement
that
de l'énergie
developed the
solaire en Espagne,
expertise
qui l'a
of
développé au
the
Caire, qui l'a
financing
développé au Maroc, qui est prêt à le
of
développer dans
solar
l'ensemble des
energy
régions de la
in
région.
Spain,
De
has
même
been working on
sur
it
le
in
vent,
Morocco,
mais c'est
and the
aussi dans
same
des
goes
sujets
for wind.
différents, comme par exemple des grands projets dont vous entendez parler, comme le métro du Caire.
It's also true
Nous
for
adorons
a lot
tous
of big
le Caire,
projects,
mais c'est
such as the
invivable.
metro of
Sa
Cairo.
pollution
We love
est
Cairo, but
simplement
the
invivable.
pollution is
Seule une solution
unbearable.
de transport en commun
It's only
permettra
with
de
the
revivifier ce
public
magnifique
transportation
capital arabe.
that we
Et
can
donc, nous sommes le grand financeur du métro du Caire. 4 compétences pour dire donc, nous croyons que la ville arabe sera la ville du futur, s'il y fait bon, travailler.
We think that Arab cities will be cities of the future if it's pleasant to live in it, to move around in it, to work in it. So what is our added value? We can bring engineers who've earned this know-how in Northern Europe, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe.
Des financements.
And secondly, we can bring financing. In the past 5 years,
au total, financé,
j'ai
demandé à Henri Martigauquier de me donner les
asked Henri Martigauquier to
chiffres.
give
Nous
me the
avons
figures
financé
today.
224 projets urbains pour
224
34
urban
milliards d'euros.
projects for 34
Donc, ce
billion
n'est pas une petite
euros.
somme, ce n'est
So
pas un petit
it
nombre
is
de
a
projets.
significant
qu'on peut
amount,
parler
it's a
à partir de
significant
cette
number of
expérience
projects as well.
concrète.
I think
Et
that
ceci me
from
fait
this
dire que quand nous avons de bons
example,
projets
we
devant
can
nous,
say that when we have
nous sommes
good
prêts à les financer,
projects
j'en ai donné un
ahead
certain
of
nombre
us,
d'exemples, mais nous
we
tenons
are
à ce que
available
les
to
projets
finance them, but we
soient
want the
conçus dans ce
projects
que nous
to
appelons,
be
nous,
designed
techniquement,
in what
une
we
approche
call
intégrée, qu'on ne soit pas
an
là pour
integrated approach. We
des
don't
déchets,
want to
ou de
be
l'eau,
here
ou
for
de l'énergie,
waste
ou
or
des
water
transports,
or
ou
energy
de
or
l'habitat, mais
transportation
qu'on
or
soit dans cette
housing.
conception d'ensemble
We want
de
to
la
have
ville
a
que j'ai entendu
global
évoquer
conception
avant moi par
of
les
the city,
intervenants
which
précédents.
I
En
heard
renouvelant
the
mes
previous
excuses pour être
presenters
arrivé un petit
talk
peu en
about, and
retard.
I apologize
Donc
again
ne
for
considérez
being
pas le
late.
problème du financement comme un
So
problème.
don't
contrairement à
look
l'idée
at the
reçue.
problem of financing
Nous-mêmes
as a
et d'autres,
problem.
il n'y a pas de monopole et nous cherchons aucun monopole. C'est pas parce
So
qu'on est la
others, we're
première
not
banque de
looking for a
projets sur la
monopoly. We're the
Méditerranée
first
qu'on
project
voit arriver
bank
d'autres
for the
plus récents
Mediterranean.
avec condescendance ou avec
And
regret.
that's not a
Il y a
reason
besoin de la
for
mobilisation de tous, de
for
l'Agence
to
française de développement
not
jusqu'à la
accept
Banque mondiale
other
pour
banks.
être aux
There
côtés
is
des
enough
partenaires. Et je
work
voudrais m'arrêter
to
puisque je
be
vois que le temps
alongside our partners,
est
and I'm going
imparti
to
bientôt
stop
écoulé pour dire ce que
because
nous
I'm running
souhaitons,
out of
c'est
time.
avoir des
To
partenariats.
say
Parce
that
que
what
nous ne
we want
sommes
is
que
set
le
a
banquier.
partnership because we
Que
are
le
only
banquier.
the
Et les
banker.
partenariats doivent évidemment être à 3 niveaux,
There
régionaux,
have-
nationaux
we have to have
et locaux.
three levels of partnership, local, regional, and national.
Nous avons créé à Marseille
Regionally,
un centre
in Marseille,
d'expertise
we
qui
set
s'appelle
up
le
an
Centre
expertise
méditerranéen
center, it's the
d'intégration,
Mediterranean
qui a un
Center of
volet
Integration,
développement urbain
which
spécifique,
has
vous êtes tous les
an
bienvenus,
urban
pour que toutes
development
les organisations publiques, tous les gouvernements de pays méditerranéens et européens,
so that
tous ceux
all
qui ont leur pierre à apporter à l'édifice, nous fassions en sorte que nous ayons une politique commune pour éviter de perdre un
can
temps
be
infini
involved to
dans
have
les
a common
chicayas
policy in
techniques, les
order not to
procédures,
waste
etc.,
time in
qu'on essaye de
procedures
rattraper en
and
aval. Donc
technical
un partenariat
details.
régional puissant.
So,
Deuxième chose,
strong
des
regional
partenariats
partnership.
nationaux puissants.
We
Vous
also
avez
need
remarqué
to
que
have
j'ai cité beaucoup d'exemples
powerful
tunisiens et marocains, parce que c'est là où
national
nous avons trouvé les
partnerships.
meilleures
I
réponses pour
mentioned
l'instant.
examples
Mais
from
évidemment,
Tunisia and
je
Morocco
serai
because
ravi
this is where we
à
found the best
Beyrouth,
answers so far. But I will be very
en
happy
Égypte
in Beirut,
et dans tous les
in
pays du bassin
Egypt, and
méditerranéen
in
à
all
pouvoir
the countries
construire le
of
même
the
type de partenariat.
Mediterranean
Et
to build
enfin,
the same type
partenariat
of partnership.
local, parce que
And
le
then
concept
local
de ville,
partnership, because
c'est pas un
the
hasard si vous avez
concept
choisi
of the
Paris
city,
pour tenir cette
there's a
conférence.
reason why
Il
you
faut que ce
chose
soit
Paris for this
emblématique.
conference.
Et donc sur le partenariat
It has to
local,
be
quitte à
iconic.
surprendre notre ami directeur
And so
général de la
on
Médina de
local
Tunis,
partnership,
je vais le surprendre.
I'm going
Je
to
vous donne
surprise our
rendez-vous à
friend from
Tunis.
the Medina
Je
of
vous donne
Tunis.
rendez-vous à
Let
Tunis
me
en juin
say
2015,
we'll meet in
dans très
Tunis
longtemps,
in June
puisque nous organiserons à
2015
Tunis en
very
juin
soon
2015
because
un
we
séminaire ouvert à tous ceux qui voudront
organizing
bien
in
venir
Tunis a
sur le
seminar
projet de
open to
Médina
all those
qu'on a
interested on the
intitulé
project
Médina
of Medina.
2030,
We
parce
called
que
it
justement
Medina
ce projet
2030
commence à se développer à Tunis
because this
est un
project,
modèle
which
qu'André
is
Azoulay
currently
valide
growing in
pour le
Tunis,
développement des
is
Saouira
one that
au
has
Maroc
been
et que
validated
nombre de
for
villes
Essaouira in
arabes
Morocco,
dans la
and that
région
many
peuvent
Arab
reprendre
cities in
pour
the region
revitaliser la ville
can
ancienne
use to
et concevoir des développements modernes
revitalize
intégrés pour avoir des métropoles et des villes
ancient
agréables à
cities
vivre, modernes,
and
et c'est
to
ce que nous
have
sommes prêts à
modern
financer.
and pleasant cities to
Merci
live in.
beaucoup.
And this is what we're ready to fund.
Donc,
Thank
pas
you.
de problème d'argent à condition qu'on ait une ville intégrée.
So no problem with money
Très
if
bien,
you have an
parfait.
integrated
Donc, vous avez tout ce
city
qu'il
and
vous
a
reste à faire.
partnership city.
Et pour finir ces interventions, pas pour finir nos échanges, mais pour finir ces interventions, je vais
And to
passer la
finish with the
parole maintenant
presentations, I'm going
à
to
Karl Charot,
give the
qui est
floor to Karl
architecte, mais
Charot,
donc aussi, comme
who
je
is
disais, auteur d'un blog qui
the
s'appelle
architect.
Karl Remarks, qui est
but
libanais
he
et
also-
qui, à la fois, donc, regarde tout ça avec un œil, j'allais dire amusé peut-être pas, mais en tout cas avec de l'humour et de la réflexion et une bonne connaissance de l'architecture et de la ville. Donc on va le laisser nous faire sourire peut-être un peu après ces interventions qui n'étaient pas du tout ennuyeuses, mais qui étaient quand même très sérieuses, sur la manière de voir ça, la complexité et la complexité des défis de ces villes arabes. Est-ce qu'il faut en rire ? J'espère, hein, surtout qu'on a visiblement des tas d'idées pour y faire face et pour les résoudre. Et comment relever ces défis à grande échelle, d'après lui?
Hello. It's nice to go last, actually. Think of me as the dessert. No, you're going to have to laugh harder, yeah? Okay. So one of the problems of discussing Arab cities is they are quite varied and different from each other. For example, the main problems in Cairo are unemployment, corruption, and oppression. Whereas in Algiers, they are corruption, oppression, and unemployment. In other cities, there's so much oppression that people don't have time to worry about corruption and unemployment. So how can we talk about Arab cities in general while addressing these differences? So what I thought I would do here is to use the first half of this presentation to present a guide on Arab cities, which will highlight these differences and show the unique challenges that face each of them. If this guide sounds absurd, it means that I have succeeded in capturing the reality of life for Arab citizens. We can then move on to talk about how to address these problems and how to work towards a better future for the Arab city and its inhabitants. Now, first, I would like to take you through a quick visual survey of Arab cities, and let's see if this thing works, because if I can't make it work, you shouldn't listen to anything I'm saying. So this survey will help you familiarize ourselves with some of the physical issues that they are struggling with. So here we have Damascus, Amman, Cairo, Beirut. And you can see clearly from these images that there's one thing in common between all Arab cities. That's right. In all of those cities, there's a clear tension between the old and the new. And this is what gives these cities their character, but also represents the challenges they face. How to deal with those tensions between tradition and modernity will in fact shape how they develop over time. Next, I'm going to talk about public space. Now, the first aspect of Arab cities that's it's always important to look at is public space, which is always important to understand the character and nature of cities. So Arab cities are known for their vibrant and dynamic public spaces. But as we can see from these examples in Cairo, Tunis, and Manama, these spaces can be overcrowded and difficult for people to use. There's a problem here in that some Western observers have misunderstood this phenomenon, and they think that these people are protesting against their governments. But this is unheard of in the Arab world. These are just satisfied citizens enjoying spending time in public space. Now, we have cities like Doha that have managed to solve these overcrowding issues with a variety of methods, such as making the city less attractive and more boring, but the solutions may have been too efficient. The next thing we will talk about is streets and transport. Now, how to organize streets for transport and different kinds of uses is an important aspect of every city. But there is a fundamental difference between Arab cities and European cities that really has a lot to do with the radically different philosophical approaches. So in European cities, there is a clear distinction between spaces for pedestrians, bicycles, cars, and public transport. As we can see in this diagram, that kind of reflects an idealized European city, but it also kind of reflects this Cartesian approach that is important in Western culture. However, in Arab cities, there is a less rigid approach, more typical of Arab culture. In a city like Amman, for example, we can see how pedestrians and cars can share the same space successfully, even though Western visitors complain that there is no place for pedestrians to walk, because they are too attached to this Western way of thinking. In Beirut, yeah. In Beirut, the arrangement is similar, albeit on smaller streets that nevertheless manage to fit the same number of cars. In Cairo, this logic is pushed to its limit, challenging the laws of physics even, and allowing cars and buses to travel in three-dimensional space. We can also see this difference clearly in this picture from the Beirut metro, where citizens use the transport space in much more original ways. I mean, for example, you can drive your scooter on the platform and sit down and have a hookah, a water pipe, and this is all just an accepted way of using this transport space. The economy and employment. Economic factors play a big role in shaping cities and a good way to understand how they function. In many Arab countries, there is a very careful selection process of citizens to determine who can work for the government, which guarantees lifetime employment and job security. This system is based on family and social connections, which is much fairer than other models that give public sector jobs to the most capable candidates, thus discriminating against the lazy and the incompetent. There is no such discrimination in the Arab world. Those who don't manage to work for the government must go into private business. The government intentionally keeps public sector salaries low to give an incentive to employees to perform better by charging citizens for their services. This is often mistaken for bribery by external observers who don't understand the local culture, but in fact, it's a system that keeps everyone happy. For example, if a vendor wanted to sell merchandise at a particular point where it's not allowed, it is possible to agree on a service charge with the local policeman, and thus ensuring business runs smoothly. Housing. The quality and type of housing is perhaps the most important aspect of every city. But here again, Western experts have failed to understand the difference in lifestyle between the West and the Arab world. And they have concluded that Arab countries are not building enough housing for their citizens. In fact, this is only a cultural difference, as Arab people prefer to live in much closer proximity to their families than is common in some Western countries. Now, this difference could be illustrated in this diagram, which is based on a study done by the Urban Diagrams Institute. And it compares the proximity levels between members of the family in different contexts. So the first one shows a typical Western family where the family members are distinct entities. So we have the father, the mother, and the two kids. And then goes to Beirut, where we can see there's a closer relationship, and then Damascus and Cairo, where you can see the kind of this intimacy level increases dramatically. These closer levels, this is, by the way, based on a very scientific analysis. These closer levels of intimacy between family members means that Arab cities can be occupied at much higher densities, saving valuable space and allowing governments to preserve the old buildings that give Arab cities their distinctive, charming character. Conclusions. So I wanted to approach the topic satirically at first in order to highlight the issues facing Arab cities in a different way. But there are serious points to be made, of course. The reality is that most Arab cities face serious challenges, but they also have a huge potential. It would be wrong to separate those urban issues from the wider socio-political and economic context, and the key to solving most of these problems must first start with political change towards giving Arab citizens more say in shaping their future and future of their cities. For a very long time, many Arab governments have looked at their populations as a burden, rather than as a potential, which is a key change in attitude required to start to address the problems facing Arab countries and cities ambitiously. This problem is most acute, but not limited to Egypt, which has a rich human resource to tap into. But we really require an ambitious level of development to create employment opportunities and improve the living standards for Egyptians. And a similar approach is needed all the way from countries from Morocco to Iraq. Now, in the midst of the violent events that have rocked the region for the past 4 years, it's easy to lose sight of those long-term aims. But they are quite crucial to overcoming many of the root causes of the conflicts we are witnessing today. It's not a coincidence, as has been alluded to before on the panel, that the scene of the Arab uprisings was mostly urban in nature, and much of the grievances had their causes in urban issues and conflicts. But even more democratically representative governments will have to contend with those issues that autocratic regimes were not able to solve. In my opinion, the key transition must be the willingness to initiate radical change. And this is, again, something I disagree with some of the other speakers on, that we really need that radical and very ambitious scale of development to overcome the issues facing Arab cities. So it's kind of sort of become fashionable in urbanist circles today to be fearful of change and to advocate small-scale incremental development. But this is more of a result of our loss of belief in the idea of future or the future than wisdom. When faced with monumental challenges, and Arab cities and societies indeed are, we must be bold enough to embrace radical and ambitious change and development. And so I will conclude by arguing that the Arab city can indeed become the city of the future, but only by employing the energy of the youthful population productively and pursuing dynamic development projects. This will inevitably mean fast-paced, large-scale change to both the physical fabric of the city and to society. But we shouldn't be apprehensive about it because the alternative is stagnation and paralysis. The last few years have shown how exhausted the old models are, and it's time for new thinking and ideas in every realm, from politics to the city. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour ces visions à la fois
Thank you very much for this sense of humor. Yeah, very deep thoughts on the cities. And I would like to know if any one of our panelists would like to react to what has been said. Maybe if you have any remarks that you would like to give us, please do before I ask you any questions, any specific questions. Do you have any comments on the positions of the different panelists? Do you have any reactions that you'd like to share with us, with the room? on whatever topic.
I would like to add here, I think it's about time that Arabian cities work together. I like the concept that has been done in Medina and in Tunisia, and how they have created and transformed, instead of changing it into an open museum, creating a city that people would love to live in it, that is full of great architecture, but a sense of living where you'd actually go back and live in the past, but still have the modernity of today. And I think this is something that we in Sharjah would love to see, of how can we collaborate with Tunisia and develop a way of how can we actually share things together between Arabian countries. We have a lot of things to offer. On another point about development and urbanization, what we have seen just now in the pictures are not really the best that we have seen, but I think the Arabian world have moved very fast, not like other countries, not like Europe. Europe have transformed in the past 1,000 years. The Arabian countries have moved much quicker than that, within 100 years of what Europe have moved within 1,000 years. However, this is what have happened. The future generation, the generation that are today, that are graduating as architects, that are graduating as master planners, have a way of change. They have a different way of how to develop a modern city. And you would see most of the new projects, whether they're in Egypt, or in Amman, or in the United Arab Emirates, or in Qatar, with the new master planners, with the new minds, they basically tend to correct all of those mistakes that have happened in the past, due to the fact that they are well knowledgeable, they know what they're doing, and they have a belief that we can actually not even replicate, we can improve what the European cities or American cities are all about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure that the goal is to duplicate the European cities in the Arab world. I think that the goal, and you said it, the goal is really to draw inspiration from the best practices, from the good examples, and to adapt them to the needs of the Arab cities, and to also make sure that it goes hand in hand with the local population. When we look at a city like Tunis that already has its history, its Medina, where you have neighborhoods that are already full-fledged. It's not like in the Gulf cities where we're starting from scratch almost. So I think that what is hard in these completely new cities is to invent from scratch. Where do we do so much choice? I think that that's much more difficult than trying to transform something that already exists. So do you have any reactions? Do the panelists have any reactions on what you've heard during the different, from the different presentations?
Okay, I think there's a clear kind of tension in the panel, which is quite representative of a bigger debate among Arab kind of urbanists and architects, where there's kind of almost like a derision towards Gulf cities, because some people are quite snobbishly say they're quite new, they develop too much, very fast. And I don't agree with that personally. I think they represent very successful experiments in developing fast. Now, there's a bunch of other issues that we have to solve with that. There's social issues, political issues, economic issues. But I think the problem is we have a cultural elite that sometimes in the Arab world is really fearful of change. And every time you ask them, what is your vision for the future? They show you a picture of the old city. And I'm for preservation. I'm not criticizing anyone for doing preservation, but where is the vision? Show me. If you're criticizing the kind of the one model that we see emerging, which is quite successful on the physical urban level in the Gulf, what is your alternative? And this is why I think it's very important to ask that question, and also not to be kind of afraid of the fact, this population question that I talked about. We can't be cute and kind of, do things on a small scale. There are big populations. They need employment, they need education, they need hospitalization. All of that needs change. We can't be shy about it. And I think this is an interesting dynamic that sort of I wanted to highlight.
Merci.
Thank you.
Oui, j'apprécie un peu cette façon de
yes,
ce rappel au fait.
I appreciate what you've just said. the fact that we should develop South-South cooperation, South-South exchange amongst different Arab cities, because these Arab cities have a lot of similarities. We have a lot to share, a lot of experience to share, and I don't think that we're doing enough of that. Second comment.
Je crois que c'est un grand débat de sortir maintenant la modernité, l'authenticité, etc.
Talking about modernity, genuity, authenticity, that's a very, very broad debate. I don't think we have enough time to address that debate. But I don't think that anybody starts from scratch. We have roots, they exist. We have origins. There is a heritage that needs to be protected and from which we can draw inspiration in order to make headway. And when I speak of heritage, I spoke earlier in my speech that we need to take into consideration all the different types of heritage that we have in our country. I said earlier that the first historic neighborhoods in Tunis after the Medina is the European city.
La ville européenne aussi avait des caractéristiques que je crois citer.
Also had features that I talked about. The fact that there was a social mixity.
Ce sont des villes, même si elles ont donné un rôle important à la voiture, ce ne sont pas des villes qui sont faites autour de la voiture seulement.
Cities aren't built around the cars. No, these are cities where it's nice to live in, where people actually get to meet one another.
Ce ne sont pas des agglomérations urbaines qui sont traversées par des autoroutes.
Huge urban zones where you have highways zipping through them. No.
Il y a la mixité de fonctions.
There is, this multiplicity of functions.
Le gaspillage énergétique.
Of course, also energy waste, which is something that you need to take into account.
Un soleil intense, j'allais dire 12 mois sur 12.
We live in cities where you have a lot of sun, a lot of sunlight, and if we use only glass and steel, and people are going to say, oh, we have a problem in energy, we have a problem with renewable energy, we need more air conditioning, and I think you just need to think a little bit, to put a little bit of thought into how you build, buildings and housing. Today we talk a lot about smart cities, etc.
préfère belle et limitée qu'intelligente et laide.
I think it's better to have a beautiful and limited city rather than a smart and ugly city, but that's just me.
Well, if I'm inclined to talk, I think I've done my talking. I've made my case, and I still quite honestly feel that we're on completely different levels here. We're on levels of wonderful, inspiring finance. I do hope I'll be able to forge an agreement with you to fund some projects in Hadramaut. However, I'm quite well aware, as you are, that it's politics that rules the financing. And it's hardly possible to create such relationships out of the norm or of the kind of corporate agenda that exists. On the other hand, I have a few comments on what I've heard, but I'm very sorry to say that none of these comments, apart from the amazing work that we saw in Tunisia, and which gives us a lot of life, and as an Arab, because I still like to think of myself as an Arab, I'm working in the Arab world, and I work with different Arab countries, so I'm one of these nomadic Arabs that travels from Morocco to India, with a few places in between. I must admit that it's very depressing to hear about the fact, two things, that because we are building a public infrastructure or a public road network, it means we are building a city. I don't think this is the proper way to inspire the building of a new city. And again, I agree with the fact that we do not invent cities out of nowhere, unless we wish to invent them out of nowhere, unless we wish not to identify with who we are and who our culture is. If we wish to bulldoze various remnants and pockets, or if we wish to dig the ground and decide that we are reinventing our archaeology and reinventing our once historic cities and call these as the souk I don't know what and the souk I don't know what, and kind of create these affable spaces, that's fine, you know. I mean, that's one way of looking at things, and there are the sources to do whatever you like. But I disagree when it is suggested that these are successful kind of interventions. I also disagree with the fact of criticizing, looking at, we're not talking about preserving cities here. I think the line should be drawn. I don't think we are discussing preservation or musicology here. We are discussing, I mean, we heard in one case of Sharjah where our colleague said, we have 16 museums in Sharjah. And we heard a statement from our colleague in terms of renovating very successfully and bringing life back to the Medina, creating a better quality of life in the Medina of Tunis by saying, we do not wish to turn the Medina into a museum. Working in Shibam and Hadramaut, which is not my mandate, I find that people are leaving these houses. And we are all aware that if people start to leave and immigrate from their buildings, then the city is turned into a museum. That's correct. Final word about cultural elitism. I think we need much more cultural elitism in our part of the world because we have none. Thank you. We have mediocrity and we have inferiority. Thank you.
Je voulais évidemment commencer par écouter les représentants du sud de la Méditerranée avant de réagir à mon tour.
Interesting to hear all these comments.
La supériorité, ce qui fait du bien d'ailleurs, en reconnaissant la supériorité de l'humour.
I must acknowledge the sense of humor, which is always really nice. So I would really like to thank my neighbor, and I thank him actually. The presentation was completely consistent, very logical. But when it is said with a sense of humor, it is much easier to install dialogue, so thank you. But he also talked about two very important things, the technological revolution and the end of the demographic revolution. First of all, technological revolution.
Aujourd'hui,
today,
sur votre iPhone,
on your
vous avez des applications,
you have different apps,
comme on dit, fabriquées dans un immeuble à
that
Ramallah,
are made in a building in Ramallah, which is financed by the EIB fund. So yes, you can see the world has changed, and the price the square meters in these neighborhoods in Ramallah are the same as in Paris. This is something that we don't talk about in France, and the world is much more complex than what we think. We are able to, I mean, I don't think we need to have this rural exodus. We start to see that these new technologies are really revolutionizing the way we worked up until now. This is why we really need to work in the city centers. And same thing goes with material. I think that tomorrow's glass will be able to produce energy rather than waste it. It will all depend on the cells, solar cells, that will be probably integrated in the glass. So what maybe today seems like something that is completely illogical will become logical tomorrow. And I'm very, very happy that our Saudi friends are helping us to work on these types of projects. So, that was my first point. Second point, the demographic revolution. There is a real Arab youth. There are a lot of young people in the Arab world, but the peak is almost reached its top. Now it is in the sub-Saharan Africa that we are going to see a demographic revolution. So the Arab world must also be prepared for a demographic crisis. That is going to happen soon enough. When you think about the cities, the future cities, you are going to have to think about how to regenerate the cities, how to make sure that it will cater to a population that is no longer going to grow as it has up until now.
qu'elles sont faites pour un nombre d'habitants qui va un peu progresser,
going to cater to a population that might increase a little bit, but that has nothing to do with the numbers between 1970s and now. And the risk is going to be the same as for European cities, to have these large urbanized zones that are going to be very, very expensive to maintain, but with no inhabitants. And these inhabitants are going to age with different needs, and you're going to have to take that into account. Well, thank you. Now I'd just like to give the floor to Camille Bonenfant for 30 seconds, and then we're going to have to conclude. But this is a very, very passionate, very interesting subject. Yes, I do agree. The infrastructure does not make a city, and I think that, as a transit operator, we are convinced of that. However, it is a brick that can be useful, that can really bring something to the city. It takes into account, of course, its history, its soul. We need to have a very holistic approach. I think we have a role to play also in more recent cities that have a white canvas in order to do away with the errors that were made in the past. I think that there are many lessons that can be learned from other cities. We see cities that are developing very, very quickly, much more quickly than what we have seen up until now. And I think that transportation is something that can help the density of a city, and that facilitates the life of the inhabitants. Well, thank you very much. Now, as I said, we are going to conclude this roundtable, but I just wanted to say that when I was listening to you, all the wealth of all of these presentations, I heard certain things that maybe not reassured me, but that I very much appreciated. The fact that our cities are made for the inhabitants, that the citizens need to feel good in these cities, need to make sure that the cities meet the needs of the inhabitants. Of course, according to the different countries, according to the different regions, the needs and the solutions will differ. But we need to adapt our cities to the climate, to the inhabitants. And today we have modern but also older techniques that we need to use together. So I think that this idea of having to really put the human at the heart of the project, of trying to meet the needs of the citizens, first and foremost, is something that we are working on in France, in French cities. And secondly, you all said that we need to integrate these multiple functions. The fact that the different bricks of the city need to communicate, and this makes way for these different cities. Cities today are different from the cities of the past. That is true. Also, we need to have a vision. You need to know where you're going, what you're doing. Of course, you need a lot of willpower in order to do what you did in Tunis and Sharjah. I'm sure it's the same thing for the IB, as you said. And Mr. Mouji, you also said you need to have a vision. And then once you have a vision, you can go ahead. And that means that you need good governance, you need citizens that gain ownership of the different projects, and if not, you will not be able to really go ahead with this vision. So I think that you all agree on that, even though all of your cities are different. You try to renovate these different cities. So yes, the Arab cities do have a future, and I hope that we will be able to talk about that sooner than later to see all of the headway that has been made. Thank you very much, and thank you for your attention, and thank you to all of our panelists for being present with us today.